Welcome to session number 2 in this, our third series of the Anglican tradition. In part 1, I dealt with the War of 1812, Anglicanism and the Tory touch. This part 2, I want to look at two prominent Anglicans within the Anglican Church of Canada and how they moved forward that what we would call classical Canadian red Toryism, which is an important part of the Anglican tradition. The two people I'm going to deal with at this particular session are Stephen Leacock and George Grant, or a tale of two Tories in that sense. As I mentioned in part 1, there is quite a difference in terms of the United States and Canada in its understanding of what Christianity is, how it's to work itself out in the church and in public life. The Tory touch, which is a very important part of Canada, could be seen very clearly in one of the key bishops in War of 1812, Bishop John Strawn. I have spent time at Trinity College, in which there's a beautiful painting of Bishop John Strawn. Strawn was a key figure in the War of 1812 in trying to articulate and move forward the Anglican way and what it meant in terms of a distinctive Canadian heritage as opposed to the Puritan American way. Two important Canadians which emerge out of that War of 1812 and Bishop John Strawn, there's Bishop Jacob Mountain in Quebec, that come following on the heels of them a few decades later are Stephen Leacock and George Grant. Stephen Leacock was probably in his time one of the best known Canadians both in Canada, the United States, England and beyond. He was an Anglican. He was at the very center of many of the major issues in Canadian ecclesial and public life. Stephen Leacock died in 1944, and many accolades were laid around his tomb because of his significant role. Leacock was very interested, and as I have mentioned in some of these series, Anglicanism is about one's personal life, it is about one's church life, but is it also about one's public life? Now, what does it mean for Anglicans to be concerned with the public life in Canada? The unique red Tory tradition that Stephen Leacock embodied in such works as The Unsolved Riddle of Social Justice, some of his political works near the end of his life, was that the state did exist. And the church was to work very closely with the state as two important institutions to bring about the common good of all Canadians. This means that Canadians do not mind paying higher taxes for the state distributes goods and wealth, so none will be marginalized. This is a form of Canadian conservatism. We conserve the good of one and all. When I talk about the Tory touch, as I had earlier, the thinking is that out of that British system, we bring together the commonwealth or the common weal. And a faith tradition which emerges from Anglicanism holds very high that the role of the church and the state in working together is to produce a commonwealth in which none are in need. And so both society and the state work together for the greater good of a nation and the greater good of a bigger world. Now, Stephen Leacock was significant in articulating what that meant in what we call in Canada red Toryism. George Grant stood very much on the shoulders of Stephen Leacock. George Grant was born in 1918 and he died in 1988. Both went to Upper Canada College, one of the most important Anglican private schools in Canada, which was an educational institution which existed for the training of Anglicans and others to take serious public roles in the world that we live in. George Grant is considered at this point probably one of the most important public intellectuals in Canada in the latter half of the 20th century. George Grant was very committed to his Anglican heritage. He became an Anglican in 1956. As I said, died in 1988. And his classic work, Lament for a Nation, in 1965, articulated very clearly and poignantly what the Indigenous and unique Canadian perspective is in terms of religion and politics in opposition to large elements of American imperialism. So when we think of a distinctive Anglican red Toryism, we're talking about a perspective in which the church, the Anglican Church of Canada, when it moves into the public realm or engages the magistrates, is very committed to the common good of Canadians within this nation often through higher taxes, so that goods can be distributed widely and well. And so when we think of Canadian high Toryism or red Toryism, Stephen Leacock and George Grant embody that in the noblest way within the Anglican Church of Canada and the Canadian context.